What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Happy New Year. There is a comforting illusion many leaders cling to when they enter these so-called strategic partnerships. The illusion that power today guarantees loyalty tomorrow. The illusion that shared enemies automatically mean shared futures. And above them all, the illusion that history somehow stops the moment a deal is signed. Vladimir Putin believed all of this. He believed that by turning Russia eastward, by feeding China cheap resources, diplomatic cover, military lessons, geopolitical chaos, he was building the ultimate counterweight to the West, a brother in arms, a civilizational ally, even a partner who would stand shoulder to shoulder with Moscow against American dominance. Well, what he actually built was something very different. He built the conditions for China's rise at Russia's expense. He accelerated Beijing's global power while hollowing out his own country. He handed Xi Jinping leverage, patience and time. And now, as Russia bleeds manpower, money and legitimacy in Ukraine, that illusion is collapsing in real time. Because Xi Jinping never needed a friend, he needed a tool. And Putin, convinced that he was playing grandmaster chess, never realized that he was the pawn in somebody else's game. So today, let's talk about how China played the long game, how Russia unknowingly financed, shielded and empowered its future rival, and why, after 168 years of humiliation and restraint, Beijing may finally see its historic moment approaching. To understand what is happening right now, you have to understand one fundamental difference between China and Russia. Russia lives in the moment. China lives in centuries. Moscow reacts, Beijing plans. While Russian elites chase short-term dominance, China patiently builds inevitability. For China, history did not just end suddenly in 1991. It did not even pause. The so-called century of humiliation is not some kind of abstract concept buried in the textbooks. It is a living political memory. It shapes how China views borders, alliances and power. Every treaty signed under weakness is remembered. Every concession is catalogued. And every loss is treated not as a tragedy, but as an unresolved debt. Back in 1858, when the Treaty of Aigun stripped China of vast territories north to the west, north to the Amur River, it was not just land that was taken. It was dignity. It was access to the Sea of Japan. It was the future site of Vladivostok, one of the most strategically important ports in the entire Pacific region, now belonging to Russia. Then came additional treaties, each one carving more territory away, each one reinforcing a narrative of humiliation imposed by stronger powers. And so 168 years have passed since then, 168 years of watching a port that should have been Chinese grow into Russian military and economic hub. 168 years of restraint, resilience, silence, and strategic patience. China did not forget, it just waited. And waiting is something Beijing does better than anyone else. I mean, the world is not ending anytime soon, right? So why not plan centuries ahead? Luckily for China, Russia started helping it to grow into a superpower. Putin thought he was creating his greatest subordinate and ended up becoming the creator of his own undoing. Rage blinds people, even supposedly extremely smart politicians. And just like that, we might be witnessing Putin's biggest and most fatal miscalculation unfolding in real time. Let's talk about it in more details in our next chapter. Putin believed that China needed Russia as much as Russia needed China. That was the core mistake. He assumed that energy exports, military cooperation, diplomatic alignment created symmetry. In reality, it created dependency, but only on one side. For years, Russia became China's silent enabler. Cheap oil, cheap gas, raw materials sold at discounts that would have been unthinkable during Soviet times. Military technology even transfers that helped modernize China's armed forces faster than Western embargoes ever could. And most importantly, political cover. Whenever China pushed boundaries in the South China Sea, Taiwan or internal repression, Russia stood by. Vetoes in the United Nations, joint statements, carefully choreographed displays of unity. Putin basically thought that this made him indispensable. Xi Jinping saw something else entirely. I mean, he said thank you, but he saw a resource colony with nukes, basically. A declining superpower willing to burn its future just to enrage the West. A leader obsessed with legacy and confrontation, predictable in his grievances, and blind to how much leverage he was handing over. While Russia poured money into tanks and trenches, China poured money into ports, infrastructure, technology, and supply chains. While Moscow isolated itself from Western markets, Beijing quietly filled the vacuum. By the time the Ukraine war began, China had already positioned itself as the economic center of gravity for much of the global south. And Russia was sliding into dependency faster than anyone in the Kremlin wanted to admit. This, as you can see, by no means was never a partnership. This was asymmetry disguised as friendship. All Xi Jinping needed at that point was some major geopolitical event that weakens Russia and creates even more dependability on China. I don't know, something like, biggest conflict on the European continent since the Second World War. And guess what? Putin delivered here as well. As soon as Russian tanks crossed Ukrainian borders, champagne bottles started popping in Beijing. That was the moment of revenge China was waiting for so long. Finally, the country that did everything possible to elevate their supposed ally is now doing everything possible to weaken itself into oblivion. Now, Xi Jinping just needs to wait for the perfect moment to strike, and that moment is coming. Putin overplayed his hand, and the consequences are coming. Let's talk about it in our next chapters. The Ukrainian war changed everything, not because China suddenly turned against Russia, not yet at least, but because Russia finally lost its bargaining power. Sanctions turned Moscow into a captive supplier, desperation erased negotiation leverage, energy once sold westward at market prices now flowed east at discounts China dictated. And Beijing smiled politely. This is the moment when pawns in geopolitics usually disappear. Not with betrayal, not with dramatic confrontations, but with just quiet irrelevance. Just, that's it, they are being forgotten. Thank you, but bye. China does not need to invade Russia to win. It does not need to reclaim Vladivostok tomorrow. All it needs is time, influence, and a weakened neighbor unable to resist economic and demographic gravity. I mean, just take a look at the Russian Far East today. Depopulation, economic stagnation, infrastructure decay, Chinese labor, trade, and capital already seep across the border. Not with tanks, but with contracts. Not with flags, but with the investments. This is precisely how China expands, by making resistance impractical rather than impossible. And let's be brutally honest, why would China even feel gratitude? In Chinese historical thinking, Russia is not a benefactor. It is a former opportunist that took advantage of weakness. That debt was never forgiven, only postponed. Putin believed that shared resentment towards the West created some kind of loyalty. Xi Jinping understood that resentment makes leaders reckless, and reckless leaders are useful, well, until they are not. So, in precisely Chinese fashion, he's going to extract every potential out of Vladimir Vladimirovich, use him until he's no longer useful, and then just throw him under the bus, regaining the favor with the West they supposedly hate so much together. So what's the result? China gets to remain the superpower, one of the biggest and the most influential countries of the world, but then also gets accepted back into the geopolitical stage as someone who toppled the regime of Putin. I don't know about you, but looks like an absolute win-win scenario in making for China. Now we reach the uncomfortable question. What happens when Putin is no longer useful? China does not do dramatic breakups, it does just silent revisions. It recalibrates the language, adjusts maps, then encourages academic discussions, promotes historical research, slowly shifts narratives until what once seemed unthinkable becomes normal. And I mean, we are already seeing this, right? We're seeing these hints. Chinese maps that label territories differently, say things Russian territory, they put it in Chinese symbols, statements that avoid explicit recognition of Russian sovereignty in certain areas, careful ambiguous language that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. All this is not a coincidence, this is preparation. If Russia continues bleeding itself in Ukraine, if its economy continues shrinking, if its population continues declining, the question will not be whether China takes advantage. The question will be how quietly it does so. Influence before ownership, dependency before claims, control before borders. Xi Jinping does not need to humiliate Putin publicly. History already did that. Current events do it even better, even further. All Xi Jinping needs is to wait until Moscow can no longer say no. Putin thought he was building a multipolar world. What he actually built was a ladder for China to climb, using Russia as the bottom step. He mistook resentment for strategy, defiance for power, and symbolism for substance. While he chased confrontation, Xi chased dominance. And now the balance is clear. China is strong, Russia is exhausted. One plans in centuries, the other improvises year to year. One absorbs, the other bleeds. Will China reclaim territories it lost 168 years ago? Maybe. Why not? Why shouldn't they? Will it discard Putin once he becomes more liability than asset? Well, that is almost certainly. Because in Beijing's worldview, alliances are temporary, interests are eternal, and history always comes back to collect. Putin thought he was playing chess against the West. Well, he never noticed that the real game was being played somewhere else entirely, and he is being discarded as a useless pawn. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Happy New Year! If you want to support my work, there are links down below, for example, Patreon, where there is an additional chapter in the end. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.